So guys, welcome. The plan for this evening is to have this panel discussion on the topic of designing for good and the devil's advocate. So I'll be taking on the role of asking the hard questions and give you guys that sort of pressure, see if you can perform. But yeah, we'll be looking at the facts that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So often, things don't always work out, and there are really actual challenges in the field, and we need to address them to sort of get over them. So that's a little bit the overview. So Stefan and Daniella will both start by sharing some slides. And then Dennis will share some questions that he's framed or some concepts that he's come up with. And then after that, I will pose some questions to them. And after that, we will have a bit of a Q&A. And you can post your questions or ask your questions directly to them. If you're in the call, you can unmute yourself and put your video on at that time. I will let you know when. You can post your messages in the chat, and I will post those questions here as well. And during that time, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask yourself, you can turn on your camera and your microphone. So yeah, let's go by order of who joined. And Daniella, you can go first. Oh, we can't hear you. You're on mute. No, you're still on mute.
There we go. Sorry, my keynote has decided to play games. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So hi everyone. It's amazing to be here. My name is Daniella Sachs. I am a South African who's currently living in the Netherlands. And I started my design career in architecture. And as an architect, I became obsessed with the question of how do you design for impact? I'm going to attempt to share a screen if it will let me. But basically, before I do that, I'll just talk a little bit more about myself. So I went from architecture, I became obsessed with how we can use architectural design process to uplift communities. But the missing piece for me was, well, how do we also uplift the environment? So I specialized in green architecture and moved to Australia to do that, and realized that, designing houses for rich people wasn't really my cup of tea, even if it was green. So I actually moved to Madagascar and kind of moved into the sustainable development sphere. And I started working on Millennium Development Goal projects, then became Sustainable Development Goal projects, really looking at how do we uplift communities? How do we uplift rural communities at this interface of conservation and community development? And throughout my now 15-year career, I've seen kind of the good, the bad, the ugly, and the amazing in how do we actually design for the impact we say we want to have. So let me, okay. Sorry, I'm so having technical issues, obviously. So let me just quit my keynote, and what I wanted to do was show you a couple of examples of where impact hasn't quite happened the way that it should, or the way that we think, where design kind of hasn't paid off. So yes.
I've made you co-host. Can you try again? Perhaps that will solve your issue.
Okay, great. Let's see. Okay. There we go. I'm gonna also share it like this. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna share it like this to avoid any other issues. So one of the most amazing examples of where perhaps design has backfired is this example, which was actually started in South Africa, raised $60 million to roll out across Southern Africa, and it was called the Play Pump. And the idea was that it would bring water to 10 million people by 2010. And in fact, by 2010, so the project was launched in 1994 in South Africa. And the idea was that the kids would play, and while they would play, they would fill this water tank, and the advertising would pay for the maintenance of these pumps. And then it would bring water to the community, so women wouldn't have to walk so far for water. So it would improve water access in townships and rural areas. And it ended up being a massive failure. By 2007, the project was basically shut down, and I don't know if it's obvious to everybody why, but when you look at the drawing, you will see that when the kids play, they have to pump water 7 meters up, and then for the water to come all the way down for someone to get water. Now, that amount of force needed to turn that wheel is actually too hard for children to do. And for it to be effective, basically the children would have to play 24 hours a day. Child labor to pump water, it's a little bit frowned upon. So what happened when children weren't playing is suddenly women who were collecting the water had to try and move this pump around. 2 women, elderly women, it wasn't really working. And one of the major problems of, how this whole thing just failed from the very beginning is that no one asked the community what they wanted. So this was supposed to be built on new water pumps, and instead it was built on existing water pumps. So sometimes it was a water pump that was broken, sometimes it was a water pump that was fine, and it actually made it harder for people to get water. So it had the adverse effects. Agriculture suffered, schools could no longer have their vegetable gardens, women had to walk to other villages to get water because they also broke. So this incredible, well-funded, award-winning, World Bank PEPFAR funded project actually made everybody's lives so much worse. And there are still remnants of these lovely white elephants across Southern Africa. In Mozambique, in Madagascar, where I lived and worked for a while, it also raised the question of, when we want to design for good and have an impact, especially for social good. And again, we come into communities as designers, and often, and I will be the devil's advocate and say, when we follow a design thinking approach and we think, okay, well, empathy, right? We have these rural villages in Madagascar, they're not quite growing enough rice, so they live in poverty, so we need to help them grow more rice. So there was a big funded project, I won't name names, and they came to help the villagers change from subsistence farming into more commercial type of rice farming. And they set up these fantastic rice paddy systems to increase yield, everything we were supposed to do. And they came back a year later, and these stupid farmers were doing exactly what they did before, because that was not their culture and their way of doing things. So although the project was designed for good, the thought process in the theory of change was right. Turn a subsistence farmer, help them get more yield, they'll earn more money, you'll lift them out of poverty. At the end of the day, the farmers weren't growing rice to make money, they were growing rice to exchange it for beans. and that wasn't their money earning thing that they were doing. So all of these projects, as soon as they were left, people went back to what they were doing because that wasn't what they needed to earn money. They were just using it to bargain and trade. And it was family groups who lived together, so they actually shared rice. So it says a lot about how much we presume as designers when we go into the field. Another interesting one on when theories go badly wrong is a concept which is, you know, popping up more and more now, which is when we're looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we want to create more just and equal spaces in our city and safer spaces for women. And sometimes, although we mean well in a lot of these projects, they have the exact opposite effects. And it turns out that a lot of the times when you create, for example, in India or anywhere else, these specific trains for women, it's actually made the situation for women far worse, because either it means women who don't sit in the women-only train, the men now feel justified to victimize them. But also, if it's late at night, they have found that, you know, it's far easier for women in these women-only compartments to be victimized. So when we're looking at wicked problems and social problems as designers, and when it comes to these concepts of trying to make more ethical designs, often these situations are a little more complex than we think. And I'm really looking forward to being questioned and diving into this far more, but I'm also quite conscious of time. So I know one of the big questions I'm raising is, well, okay, well then what do we do? You know, if the theory of change isn't helping and design thinking isn't quite getting us there, how do we start to think about how to design? And where's the relevance also for businesses? Because a lot of businesses with ESG are really looking at designing for the environment and designing for social, hitting targets, being more purpose-driven. And while that's wonderful, the Sustainable Development Goals haven't really been designed for business. They've been designed for these types of development projects with great theories of change. So it makes the task for designers in a business environment actually a lot harder, because there's a lot, we need to move beyond the theory of change and make these Sustainable Development Goals more relevant. We need to actually design for impact. So I just have a quick example, which is basically, there was a project in South Africa where bank wanted to become more purpose-driven and therefore invest in companies that would improve Sustainable Development Goal 11, which is to make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. So they wanted to invest in companies that were going to uplift backyard shacks in townships and squatter camps in South Africa. So one of the shifts for when we're designing from a theory of change to designing for impact is a shift to take much more systemic view and ask far more questions. And it's about understanding, first and foremost, the role a backyard shack plays within a community. And what that backyard shack does is it actually keeps a family kind of at the poverty line, because they're often only reliant on grants, and those grants barely pay for food. And this old gogo, the grandparents who live in the house, look after a whole lot of children, and renting out this backyard shack, the more shacks they have, the better, the more rental they can get, and the more money they can create, you know, the more they need that. So actually, if you were to put less but better backyard shacks, you're not necessarily improving their lives, you're actually potentially making it worse. So if you take a systems design, so an impact design perspective, it would be looking at, well, what is the purpose of that backyard shack is playing? And if we were to improve it, how do we do it in a way where we're creating more value chains of impact? So how do we look at the skills and materials? How do we source those in a way that creates more jobs and more income within the local community? micro industries, job creation, women, and also how do we understand, so this is a bank, so they can make a one-off, philanthropic move, but that's often not sustainable, right? And here's the devil's advocate. For business, creating impact can only be sustainable often if it's creating profit for the business. So in this bank scenario, if we can design a way for the bank actually to get profit of solving this problem, then we can create a continuous cycle. Then we can really create exponential impact. So in this case scenario, the bank's problem that they were trying to solve is that the poorest of the poor aren't saving with the bank. And the problem they're trying to solve is how do we get them to save? They're saving, but they're actually saving with their savings clubs outside of a banking system. So in this case scenario, to create a profitable solution for the bank that has impact, you actually help to create a savings club for the women. So the Stokvel's the savings club, and you build an impact cycle that through saving with the bank, the women can increase the amount they can save, the credit they can take, increases their credit limit. So you're lifting them out of poverty, a group at a time instead of one backyard shack at a time. So when we're designing for impact within business, I think that if we don't take into consideration the fact that this needs to tie into how a business makes, why the business exists and how it makes profit, often the solutions are just not sustainable and are going to be incapable of delivering impact. Well, I know that that's quite a controversial statement to make. At the end of the day, by helping the bank make profit, you're actually taking far more sustainable development bank goals in the end. So your impact's actually enhanced. So I think I've spoken far too long, but I wanted to spark some of this devil's advocate conversations from the get-go.
Awesome. Wow. Thank you very much, Daniella. Very insightful. I have a couple of questions already, but let's head on over to Stefan. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Daniella. Quite enlightening. And I also have made my own notes because I have a slightly different perspective on something, and I'm curious to explore that. So I'll first go into my presentation. Maybe it also sparks something in you guys.
Oh yeah, good.
All right. So can you see the presentation?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Hi, my name is Stefan Barac. I work for a full service providing company that's called Mimacom up in the top left corner. Our base is in Switzerland. It's the mothership. It's a .com company. I am a human-centered designer. I used to go by design manager. I used to go by UX. So whatever you want to call it human-centered, call it focus to serve. And yeah, devil's advocate, we mean well, but we do harm in some cases. And here I have taken a real life scenario from a customer, not such an impactful story as Daniella has just told, but it's a medical laboratory. And basically it was a strategic design project, also a service design project, and then in the end, a product design project. And that case totally belly flopped. And now I'll go into some numbers. So one of the goals was to create an order entry to get blood probes, urine samples, any bodily fluids and tissues from A to B in an automated kind of way. And it was also to help enabling certain kinds of people in doing their work faster, more precise. And it was from paper to screen, because so far this industry is not like B2C. It's not like everything's happening on mobile devices. It's like a Wizard of Oz. There's people pretending to do, there's people actually working behind the curtains, printing things, faxing sheets of paper from A to B, because a lot of medical practices are still using fax as a communication mode, and then doing as if it was digital. So entering this client, the first maturity had to be established. It took us to tell them, you are not the center of attention. You guys are not the user. It cost the client 50K in cash for us to advocate that. Sounds like a big number. So then they asked, but who's the user? And we had a huge amount of groups. We had technical facilitators, support line workers, we had laboratory assistants, medical practitioners assistants, doctors, bike couriers, you name it. And the second step was like, the CEO and C-level of the client said, we know who we're designing for. It's the doctors. We know it clearly. Then we started to design. Although we protested, we wanted to interview. They're like, no, you can do it on the way. And then we designed and implemented at the same kind of time. And sorry, something happened. So here we go. Then we were allowed to enter their premises and asked their internal people, like, who are the users? And they immediately told us, it's not the doctors. The doctors are just the assistants. The people running the show for exchanging blood probes and everything are the medical practitioners' assistants. So we had by that time already, or the client had already spent around 2 million. And it took us 50K to make them realize that the whole design, the whole development was for the bin, the rubbish bin. So it was already a ratio of 1:40. And until that point, the customer already said interviewing and everything, research is too expensive. So just bear that in mind, 50K of finding truth and investing 2 million parallelly in development. And then that was all for the bin because we had to restart. So we found out that the protagonists were female between 20 and 30, managing medical practices, and had users like 50 patients per day. And then we did mock-ups and tested it with them. And that tests cost 10K. But the snag is parallelly to the tests, the development was going on in the background, and the 10K then showed us results that, the parallel developed applications did not serve the needs of the users. So the ratio was like 10,000 towards 4 million in total invest. It's a ratio already of 1:400 for the bin. And so whatever you are or we are designing for, test, experiment, test, and adapt and test and adapt and invest as little cosmetics and development as possible in product design, service design, or strategic approaches. First, ask for the utility or usefulness. Is the idea that I'm trying to sell even something that solves a problem? Second, then test if it's accessible, which is very different from usable, because accessible is primarily for impaired people. Usability is for all persons, accessibility also, but benefits are for all people, but accessibility primarily is for people who are impaired. And then aim for joy. That's like the peak performance. And again, as I say, can't get the last slide. Yeah. If you test and you fail in the beginning, you will have the 100% chance to reach your audience. If you're not testing, then the hills will not be alive with the sound of testing, and you will invest in a go live that is minimum 400 times more expensive than just the testings. Thanks.
Oh, thank you
Back
very
to the
much,
studio.
Stefan. Thank you. That was great. And now, Dennis, it is your turn.
Let's first unmute. Yeah, so a small introduction of me. I'm a dinosaur. I started interaction design and got my master's degree in interaction design in 1999. So, but ever since I've been into the interaction design UX space. And there's one thing I've observed throughout my career. It's our intrinsic tendency to assume. And we often assume that clients, being domain experts in their respective fields, inherently know what the best for their users. We agree and we execute almost on autopilot. And it's kind of what we see here in the presentations. It's like the clients have best intent. They think like, we're gonna change the world and you can facilitate us with that. But how often do we take a step back to truly challenge and validate these assumptions? We don't. How frequently do we push back? Not out of defiance, but out of genuine curiosity and drive to understand why behind the what. And I want to go on a journey with you in this setup to see what's going on. Question the status quo and truly delve into the heart of the user-centric design. And let's not just listen, but actively engage, challenge, and co-create.
Sounds pretty amazing. Somebody in who's just joined. There are a couple of people online watching. So I've pasted the link in the comments. Nice. If you want to join, you can come have a conversation with us. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you. So guys, I've prepared some standard questions that I wanted to address this evening, and they are in the list, which I will go down in a while. But while you were introducing yourselves and your experience and your topics, I had a couple of questions myself. So Daniella, I will start with you. Henry Ford said that if he had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster cars. While field research has always been valuable, sometimes people don't always know what they want because they stick to what they know. And so that's the first hurdle of designing for humans as they are, not as we hope them to be. And then the second hurdle is also people who live in a community do not always agree and want the same things. So how can you design for the user when the users have various needs and requirements?
Well, I'm just so happy by what Dennis said, because he actually already answered the question for me. We get so stuck on designing solutions that we take the problem statement for granted. And when it comes into asking a community what they want, our task as designers is, I would say, to look at how we can solve a problem in the most elegant way not being the most pretty, but the best possible way. So it's less about asking people what they want and more than figuring out actually what is the problem. So there's the problem that you're given, and often that's where you run from. And that's my issue with design thinking, is it kind of takes the problem, you spend like, a couple of minutes looking at the problem, and then you run, right? And then you do testing and validation. We don't spend enough time really digging into that problem to understand, well, what is its root cause? Well, what is the actual problem? And this is what people say, this is what other people say, this is other people's perspective. And when you bring that all together, it gives us a better idea of what that real problem is. And I think the best service we can give as designers for our clients is really to interrogate the problem. And I think whether it's working in a community, whether working with a client, your customers have different wants and needs, the same as in a community. So you're always going to be dealing with people who want the product to solve different things for them. And I think that comes with the territory. And the only way to really address that is by going to the root cause of really digging deep to understand the problem you're solving, because that becomes kind of the universal. And I think that often we fall in love with our solutions more than we fall in love with the problem. And I think that's often where we fall over ourselves.
I have a second question for you. So you talked about designing impact for business. And for me, this brings up the question of what is business? And actually, I'm addressing this in a talk tomorrow as well, value and values. What is business? So in a landscape where businesses are exploiting people, is solving those business goals really a priority, because it's actually creating more problems than it's solving? How can you go about defining which companies' goals are worth solving and which are not?
It's a really, really good question to ask. And I think that, we often think that we operate at the beck and call of clients without having the ability to define what clients we do and do not want to work for. And it becomes really important, for yourself and your values, to assess what type of businesses. It's really easy to go, well, like, all consumerism is evil, and to make, big blanket statements. But there are also incredibly visionary leaders that you could be supporting who are trying to turn things around. And more companies are realizing that if they want to future-proof, they need to approach business differently. More and more companies are realizing that they want to be more purpose-driven, that in order to retain staff, they need to start behaving differently, that they can't just, talk about their brand, they actually have to live their brand. And what we're seeing is a really interesting shift. And I think that the environment is growing so that you can, align yourself with the type of clients who share your values and beliefs. And I think that that's not to judge anybody who decides to work for other types of businesses. I know incredible people who are working for organizations like Shell and are helping them on projects that are shifting, on their green energy projects. So it kind of depends where you want to be in the cog. And I think there's a lot of space to play, and there's a lot of space to disrupt from within, or to choose to align yourself with businesses who share your values.
Yeah, I think that's also, greenwashing is another topic that comes up, and it's one of the other questions that I have. But Grace here writes, figuring out the problem and doing the research takes time. How can designers communicate and persuade clients or stakeholders more time and resources while many might be looking for fast solutions? Yeah, so how can designers get companies to allocate funds and resources when they're just searching for quick and fast solutions?
I think Stefan's case study really kind of showed one of the most important arguments that you can illustrate to clients in monetary terms, is that you can rush to a solution. At the end of the day, it's going to cost you far more time and far more money than it would be to, dig in and validate the problem to begin with. And there is an element of client education, and you will have clients that, do resist that because they're in love with their solution and you can't budge them. But we do have enough case studies to demonstrate that it makes more effective business, and it's a far more effective investment to validate your big spend to begin with.
Here's
I've got to add on to this one,
Please.
because I don't think we have lots of different deliverables. It's not just the design. And if you take, so if you want to take research and we can promote stuff, it's not so much about that. It's the fact that we have a business sense. Is it viable? So it's not just the design, it's just one of the deliverables. So you need to go into layers. Yeah. So it's not just go to the manager and says, look, we're going to make a really nice solution, create a nice mock-up, and then say like, well, let's do this. It's more or less taking every stakeholder into account and create deliverables to get them with you, but in different ways. So let's say if you want to have money inside of the company, it's going to be something that is going to be a business proposal. It needs to have graphics and stuff. And if you want to say like, well, we don't take the user too much into account, so then you need to take the pointers from help desks. It's like, well, it hurts there. It's killing us that we put so much support in these issues, and you take that to management, or so it's kind of different deliverables. We're not designers, we are use experienced designers. That means we have all kinds of different ways to interact with different stakeholders, and it's going to be totally different every time. So I think that's how can designers communicate. We're designers, but we don't offer designs. If that answers a little bit the question.
I have a pretty evil advocate's question. So, supporting the devil here, and the devil is, of course, the straw man comprised out of every evil quality that one may have encountered throughout one's professional journey. So, and this is personal experiences that I've had that fuels this question. But companies might not actually care about customer loyalty. They might not actually care about their sustainability. So if you look from the governmental lens, what many governmental organizations struggle with is getting companies to pay tax, for example. So you get these sort of schemes where something is launched, it's sucked out of all of its capital. It's okay if it goes because it's already invested in another place that's going to use the same resources, just reskin it and give it a new purpose. So that's one challenge. Other challenges include luxury brands. Luxury brands typically exist out of exclusivity and the in-group, out-group mentalities. And often they act like, the nonchalant teenager towards the child who's like, oh, I'm too cool for you, making the child want to interact more with them. So, for example, during one case study I did years ago, when I studied public relations, there was a designer brand, and they had a website, and they of course had telephones, but nowhere could you find any information to contact them. And they purposefully did not want to contact the customer or give the customer access to their HQ, because they wanted to keep their customers desperate. And this is what luxury basically works on. Any person in a normal, healthy environment wouldn't give away more money for something which you can get an equal thing for the same amount of money. It's definitely something that they need, that they pay that much more money for. Now, the third issue on top of that is also, for example, and I've worked with a person like this, was a manager of customer experience, and I was designing some e-com stuff, and I was like, yeah, but what about the customers? And his response was like, if the customers, I don't care about the customers, we're pushing the profits here. And this persona exists. So now you encounter this as a designer. What do you do? Do any of you have any ideas?
Yeah, I'd love to chip in on that.
Yeah.
So that's to me sounding what you just described as using dark patterns. Dark patterns are something like an addiction. What's the difference between an addiction and a habit? They share a lot of traits. What I have researched is I found out an addiction leads to negative outcomes. It always spirals downwards to despair, to angst, to a lot of addictive behaviors where people are not getting out of something. And positive habits, for example, my personal training is like a habit. I do it every day, and you might say I am dogmatic about it. But it helps me get clarity and health and good VO2 max, maybe a longer health span during my lifespan. Who knows? So it's got positive effects. So I know that this small addiction is more of a good pattern. And it's pretty clear human-centered design, as the dinosaurs of us will know, is based also on ISO norms such as the 9241, which is the human-centered design norm #1 for me. And on the first 5 pages, it says that we do products to enrich the health of the people on the other end, on the receiving end. So we're not doing something for profiteers. We are trying to get dark patterns out of our practices. So if you say as the devil's advocate, yeah, but how about we use this for the profiteers? It's like, yeah, let's do that, but in a positive manner, with not dark patterns, but light patterns. Let's do it in a sharing kind of manner, so that we are creating a business that is profiting you, and then let everyone grow.
So one of the panelists in the upcoming panel discussions, she's addressing colonialism. And the thing is, there are certain profits to be made, but who profits and who loses? Because businesses today are founded in routes which were not ethical, and a lot of, so for example, the sin marketing that you addressed earlier, using things like addiction, we use it with sexuality, the female form. It's still just used everywhere to try and sell stuff, and this objectifies women, and it puts us in that sort of scenario. So, but it's not going to stop soon because it still sells. One experiment, they gave a line of guys, they asked them to spend some money. The guys were very sensical. They didn't spend their money. Then they threw in a couple of bras, and the boys fondled the bras. And afterwards, they were spending their money so much more easily. So that's also human-centric design, because you're factoring in all of the factors that is human, the greed, the vanity, the lust. So, with all of this greenwashing and whitewashing and content washing, what techniques, methods, how do you, to get a tangible answer for any designer watching this, or you're wanting to know these answers, how can they, what steps can they take? How do they get started in defining what is good and designing for good?
Yeah, well, a good heart doesn't always lead to a good solution. It's a combination of intent, understanding, and execution that hits the mark. So basically, if you have a product that you need to sell, but it's, yeah. It's also the part that what product are you trying to sell? And just write in things. It's like, let's do good. So I don't work for oil companies, or I don't do this or that. Sometimes we're so stuck with what is good and what is bad that we forget about what needs to be done, what is the core of the problem. And sometimes you can't solve the problem. And then you can try to create nice solutions that women feel safe, guys are more less metro, or it is sometimes you have a big picture, but you always start with small steps, I think.
Yeah, and that's another dilemma I would like to address, which is, the dualistic sense of our logic. Yes, no, good, bad, black, white, ones and zeros. That's also the systems that we build. But we're trained from a very young age to develop this logic. And life is very multiplistic. Humans are very multiplistic, and we don't have that duality. So I think that's another thing that makes it complicated is greenwashing. So B Corps, for example, you might follow a B Corp and think that they're ethical and sustainable. And then you read something and it's like, oh, so it just adds extra sort of stress there. Yeah, so I also, Dennis, I wanted to ask you a little bit about, you were talking about assumptions. Now, it's safe to assume that we like to assume. Often what I've encountered is that when you're posing questions, so that you don't assume, but that people may feel threatened that you've made this question as a question upon them and not the topic. And how do we define that ground so that we can actually question the problems without making it personal or becoming personally involved?
Well, you need to interpret anything you get in. So if you are like in design thinking, if you're looking into the world and you define, then you're basically just exploring, very curious. So you're not there to ask the wrong question. You just obtain information that you interpret, and then you can slowly go to more. Then you also know who to talk to. Sometimes you have the wrong person. He or she doesn't have the answers. So it's just like, okay, now I know that I need to talk to somebody else. And then slowly define a little bit in which space you are, which stakeholders are there, and slowly you get to the fact that you see stuff, interpret stuff with your experience, and then you know, like, okay, now I can ask the right question to the right people, and they won't have any reluctancy in giving me the answers, because they are going with me into what might or should or could be a problem. It's like, well, I experienced this in the same way. I have the same, yeah, if I look at it in this way, I can relate. And then slowly you have a conversation like you would have about topics. Yeah, everybody is like, because it's so predetermined. It's like, this is good, this is bad. No, it's just like, well, we're here now. So what happened when you woke up this morning? And it's so much out of their context that they forget about the fact that you're also going to ask questions about their work or their processes. But you have them inside of a story, and slowly you get into like, okay, that might be hard for you. So I think that is the solution. Might be get rid of assumptions into.
So it's really something that you have to develop over time and continuously try and find the right sources. It's not you can't just listen to one episode of The Devil's Advocate and make up your mind. You have to keep talking, keep searching, keep exploring.
Yeah, and be very, very straight in that. Be curious. It's like, well, why are you constantly talking about this femininity? There's like the evil that women have. Why are you constantly getting this topic into our conversations? Like, well, there might be a reasoning, but why is that? Maybe that also gives us a reluctancy in what is good. Yeah, we cannot even talk about like greenwashing. Sometimes a person that's really like almost Greenpeace-like, yeah, is bad for the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he will be like, well, I'm good. I want my children to be good. Everything is green. I only have, but they actually destroying the world by sticking to some pre-assumed
Ideology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes if a company says like we're green, they aren't green. Sometimes people are green and they aren't green. No?
Yeah.
So they are in the A12 here and they like, we want this, but they are not green because they are part of the problem sometimes.
Yes. Exactly. Yeah. No, I think that's definitely the case. Many people try to be good, and we, so for example, Robert Kozma, you were there on the day, Dennis, and I believe some of you have also seen his content at least. So he's authored the book, Make the World a Better Place, Design with Passion, Purpose, and Values. And so there's the value element is my question. What is values? The company that's greenwashing its products values the profits that it's making from misleading the public, and the public values the sort of guilt-free, or the guilt that's lifted off their shoulders by making these assumptions. And when you the road to hell is paved with good intentions, because we as all living creatures, I believe fundamentally we don't operate from a level of evil unless evil has been bestowed upon us and we're reflecting that back into the world. But evil has been bestowed and is being bestowed all the time. And so digging through all of those layers is sometimes quite perplexing. Back in the 90s, we used to talk a lot about the midlife crisis. I haven't heard that in a really long time, but nowadays what I hear a lot is awakening. Yeah. And I akin this much to when a child discovers Santa is not real. It's like, wow, everybody's been lying to me. This is a conspiracy theory, everybody? And that's, you find that in your adult life, that you have these realizations like, oh, that company was lying to me, and these politicians will psychology, which I think we're all very related to because of our UX. Last year they proved that chemical imbalances don't cause depression, and all of these medications have been harming people more than healing people. And of course, now there's all of these generations of psychs who essentially did evil things because
it's like what you said, everything starts with a good intention. So what happens if a company creates windmills? It starts with the great intention that we create windmills, then we create energy, but there's no new insights. In Dutch you call it voortschrijdend inzicht. That means the business model works. So now there's subsidies. The subsidies is getting into the company. So they have a business model, and the business model keeps the companies, the green companies, alive because they create windmills and we do good. Then it's stories that everybody understand, like, well, we need to give them more subsidies because it's good. It's a good starting point. We need to make everything green. And now Greta, whoever that she's like, well, we need. So now in Finland they are talking about like nuclear plants that is much greener than the windmills. But it's all about new insights. But if you're already on the high, like the train is already going, and the money comes in, and we're doing it, so we need to have more copper, we need more metals, we need more oil inside of the windmills, otherwise they don't turn. Oh, they burn down. Oh, now we put it let's put it in the sea. Yeah, that's a good idea. So it's constantly with great intentions, creating a better world, but we are windmill builders. We're not something else. So we will keep on doing this, not anything else. It's our business model. We do good, we do green, so therefore we do nice stuff. I think that's kind of it. And it's hard to then say like, okay, now we stop building this because we think of what we know now, that maybe that's not the right direction we need to go. So you see that it's like lagging. It's constantly going forward, but not basically going backwards. That's my.
Yeah. Can I chip in there? I think that there is kind of what's missing is the honesty around the fact that industrialization happened. We've been doing businesses in a certain way. We've done energy in a certain way. And now everything we're doing is actually experiments. We don't actually know what will work. We don't actually know the outcomes yet. No. So we're actually design testing and iterating our way forwards. And when we pretend we have the solution, that's when I think there's the risk of greenwashing. But if there was the honesty of saying, we don't know, we're trying, it becomes an invitation. It becomes an invitation to be like, okay, well, let's test to see if this would work. Okay, well, what if we work together? Could we solve this? And it creates a quite a different environment where I think things would move a lot faster. But instead, everybody's like trying to pretend they have like this, the solution, like the vegan movement, for example, like, okay, cows are bad, eating meat is bad, without question, when, soya farms are burning down the Amazon. So all of the soya you're eating is not helping the problem. And on the other side of the coin, we're bringing cattle into Namibia to help push the deserts back, to bring plants back, to regreen Namibia, because actually animals play a really important, grazing cattle play a really important part in the ecology, but the way we farmed them, the design of that needed to shift. So it's about being honest about the fact that we need to figure out how to design better systems, and the only way we can do that is actually through experimentation.
Sticking to South Africa, since we're both South African, that's basically what Elon Musk has done to make his rocket ships more affordable, and to sort of further advance the technology in that region. Daniella, do you think that human-centered design or design thinking can arm designers with sufficient tools to be able to design for good or to design ethically?
No. I think it's a great tool set, but it's a very limited tool set. It's a nice introduction, but it's not the be-all and end-all of design. And while I have nothing but admiration for how incredible IDEO are with their marketing and branding, an ability to make elements of design digestible, I don't think it gives designers enough of a tool set to be able to dig into problems, to be able to question the problems and question the question, and to dig deeper. It's so surface. And the fact that it starts with the empathy, like, well, I'm going to be now pretend that like I'm you and I know what you're going through. And it doesn't create space for nuance, and it doesn't create space for depth. So I feel like it limits designers more than empowers them. I think it was great to get businesses to understand why they needed design, but I don't think it's enough of a tool set for designers, no.
All right. And then I have some questions on the list here. I think from your presentations, I'd like to ask the audience to also ask their questions. And in the meantime, while those questions come up, I'll just go through some of the questions on the list here. In the pursuit of design for a better future, what are some potential unintended consequences or negative outcomes that designers and innovators should be wary of, and how can they mitigate these risks? And you may all answer on that if that makes sense to you. Or we go on to the next one.
No, I do think that sometimes you need to kill off a company. So sometimes they started with the right intent, they started with the nice ideas, but stuff has evolved. So sometimes you just need to, it's the wrong direction. So you need to just stop doing that. But that's the hardest part, I think. So I don't know how we can do that. I worked for Nationale Nederlanden here in Holland. It's an insurance company, and they're basically still working on pension funds and stuff. And that's not only old-fashioned, it's just not sustainable in this world. So you need to really redo this. You can tell them, they won't. You can give them different solutions, they won't. So it's kind of, I tried, I gave them lots of alternative mind farts, but no.
You can lead the donkey to the water, but you can't make it drink.
Kind of, yeah. That's
yeah.
it. If that answers your question, but it's kind of, yeah.
Well, I think, you know, like I said earlier, I think it's an ongoing conversation. And even when you know, I think we all agree that even when you think you have your answers, you still have to continue to question. But Grace had a follow-up question, and that was, would it then be a good idea to give a roadmap of the research plan beforehand? So that's a follow-up question to the previous question, which was figuring out the problem and doing the research takes time. How can designers communicate and persuade clients and stakeholders to be for more time and resources while many might be looking for fast solutions?
Might I take this one? Thanks. I do believe that proper research takes time, but not at one part of the project. Like as Daniella and Dennis have said, like permanent experimentation, repeat, adapt is our lives on a big kind of scale. And don't see it as a zero-sum game. See it more like pension funds. Okay, they are old-fashioned. See it more like it's not in game theory. You have like the competitive games and you have the cooperative games. So we have to start to business-wise also think as, okay, we are an ecosystem. We cannot outgrow each other, or we have to kill others, like financially or physically even. And figuring out the problems, it never ends. So always challenge your designs. Designs can be like something on screen, can be something physical, can be a service that we build or intend, and always question it, and then look at it and look in the mirror and say, have I solved somebody's problem, or have I replaced one problem with 10 other problems by 10 features?
But that's the thing, you can solve somebody's problem and still create problems for other people simultaneously. And this is sort of
Sorry, you can, but you shan't. Like my mentor and friend, he always said in his thick Swabian accent, by the way, if you're there, Hartmut, all the best. You understand, Kerle? You gotta make it simple. Simple is best. Because simple really makes everything go faster and you know, simple. You're too complicated. So every idea that's too, basically every idea that's too complicated for us to understand, don't do it. Break it down, compartmentalize it, and make it work on a very simple level.
But
Like,
I think that's
don't brand.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I have a bit of a lag, so I thought you were done. I'm sorry.
Oh, I can be done. I just want to bring an accessibility example, like we discussed today on a workshop. If you try to color brand a traffic light, for example, it's like, that's a very interesting idea. Interesting being like, it's not a good idea if you want to make the red color blue because the brand color is blue.
Yeah.
So, and also if you want to shift something. So some things we need to follow, some rules are already like intrinsically learned or are in our instincts. And we need to explore that and do not get fancy in things, but keep it simple, keep it sweet, and stick to what works best for others, not for us.
But that's also, you know, if you look at a lot of the challenges that we're called, and you know, if you're reading popular media, you'll notice that there's a higher and higher demand on designers to act in certain ways and design in certain methods. So the demand is on our shoulders, but at the same time, are we not hurting ourselves with oversimplifying things? So in the early 90s, the idea of the dumbing down of society became prevalent. And there's measurable data that proves that through the generations we're becoming less intelligent and less capable. And is that maybe a byproduct of oversimplification? And the reasons why we have these challenges that we can't solve is because we cannot understand the complexity or the multiplicity, because we're thinking narrow, focused, ignoring quite a lot to get to that, you know, very specific region. So the question is, the devil's advocate question here is, what is the responsibility of the long-term outcomes of the design decisions that we make today?
Yeah, please, Daniela, you haven't.
I'll just jump in quickly first. So I want to link those two statements together that you made, because, you know, the play pump example I gave you was an example of when our tendency to over design is kind of where a lot of the problems are created. And when we talk about design, a simple design, it's not simplified. It's actually finding the most, our job is to find the most elegant, being elegant, simple, the best possible solution, you know, to a problem. And when it comes to a wicked problem doesn't then necessitate that we need a complex design because it's a really complex problem. I think that often it is where we've seen the most powerful solutions to wicked problems, they've been as simple interventions in plural. So sometimes we think one solution can solve something, where sometimes it's a combination of simple solutions put together. So I think there's a huge difference in simplification and trying to find the best possible simple solution, which is the most cost effective, the most usable, which takes, you know, the complexity of problem solving into account and solves it in the best possible way. And I think as designers, we're always striving to better and better our practice and the elegance, right? Instead of saying the simplification, the elegance of our designs. And I think there's a misnomer that that's about a simplification. You know, it's
but I think
the opposite.
That's in my interpretation, and I think we all interpret differently based on our existential experiences. So the question of simplicity is not so much on the output of designers, but the effect of the output. So a couple of 100 years ago, people were able to do much higher calculations in their head than after the calculator was designed. We were way fitter. We didn't have such a thing as obesity when we had to walk and commute the hard way. So in a lot of ways, our technological and innovation breakthroughs also, like cars are really, I loved my car in South Africa. I used to love driving, and I loved speeding as well. Like everything about a car I love. But essentially the negative impacts of that is also, I mean, we have the data that it's bad for the environment, but there's so many other things that it influences. So if you're living in a rural area, you don't have access to amenities or shops or organizations that you have in the cities. In the cities, when you have a car, there's so many people fighting to get to their places that you have traffic jams. So all of these simple solutions, or beautifully simplified solutions like a car, it brings with it so much more. So it's never really narrowed down. I see a correlation. Everything we create in itself also creates. And we're not always, you cannot imagine the future. You cannot imagine maybe cars are ruining the environment when you start it because it's new. And this is also where we are with the digital revolution, Web 4.0, this situation where we're in. Technology is advancing. It's relatively new systems, and the data that we have through the technology that we have. And when the .com era really popped up, there was a lot of data that was sucked up, and a lot more of the human behavior could be verified through data, because you can measure what 100 people across the world does online much easier than going to 100 people in real life and figuring out what they're doing. But with that also came the dark design, because you could see, okay, when we have this, then they react that way, and let's push that. So it's always like a multi-headed beast. And that's, I guess, the devil here. How the devil do we beat the devil?
Giving back the question, could light patterns even exist without darkness or dark behaviors? Like, would there even be a recognition of good behavior if there was no bad examples?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, and people got stuck in old ideas sometimes, meaning that companies start out with a different idea. Let's say Nokia, they started in 1865, and they were a wood pulp mill in Finland, and now they became a phone company. Samsung was trading in dried fish and noodles, and now they have electronic. So it's kind of, you start somewhere, and if you can recognize that you need to head to a different direction, maybe by CEO or whatever, but you have something, we see an opportunity, then existing companies, sometimes hundreds of years old, can reinvent themselves to be purposeful and maybe even better. Yeah.
Yes.
Maybe the guys who make the pistols will later become fishermen. I don't know, but it's kind of, you can start off wrong and be good, or maybe because of business incentives, or maybe by other stuff. But the fact is that companies start somewhere, and if they're big enough, they are like, okay, the why is there, why I'm doing what I'm doing. So let's reinvent ourselves. We need to, because this doesn't work anymore. And there are
So
lots of examples.
So being dynamic and being sort of moldable, adaptable is a key trait that needs to be developed.
Yeah, because even if you think you're good, sometimes you're part of the problem. And then you recognize the problem and try to solve the core of the problem, and not trying to make more solutions, because our intent was so right in 85. We had so much great ideas, and now, yeah, it's like the records are coming back. It's like, well,
Yeah,
so pure, the sound.
yeah. Well, so for me, one of the questions you posed was like, how do you define good and evil, and sort of focus on the positive. I lost it a little bit. Sorry, my cat is making noise over there. So we start off always being, Hitler believed that he was right when he exterminated the Jewish people. The slavers believed that they were right for enslaving people. Samuel Cartwright, a psychologist of the last century, he wrote about drapetomania, and it was adopted briefly as a valid explanation for why slaves were mentally ill. If they wanted freedom, that's mental illness there. So our rationality changes. We can rationalize anything based on how objective or subjective we approach it.
To interrupt, I think power corrupts. So I don't think it's correct. It's like we start with the right thing. I think if you are in power, you can make wrong decisions, and they are not in the right incentive for what you do. It's like you can use Hitler and stuff, but it's like raping a child. It's like big things. It's like, oh, that's bad. Oh no. So you don't want to go there. You don't want that. That's evil. That's now you've got an example.
And how do you know? How do you know that is pure evil? Like, is it a sense? Is it an emotion? Is it an instinct? How can people tell when they're in this situation?
Data. I think the cure for that is data. The cure for any belief is getting data, as Daniella said before, is like obtaining data. Does it help or does it harm environment, people, cultures? Like, what's the effect of it? Like the real effect, not the hypothesized upon effects. And like even the Greeks had slaves, but they were discussing about the morality of sending their own young boys to war. So there has always been this dilemma.
Yeah. But that's again that validations and the source from which we validate ourselves. I studied law briefly, and of course you need to make certain arguments in court to defend your case. And as a designer, you often have to defend your design choices. So it's pretty relevant. But one of the things that you learn pretty early on in law is that you can argue anything, yes or no, and it's the mitigating criteria that defines it. So if you are doing something which other people are saying, well, this is pretty evil, and you're like, no, I'm a good person. We all do this. This is what good people in our community do. That is an instant shock when you're confronted with questions about what your core beliefs as good are. And it happens daily. It happens in businesses. It happens in societies. We're in a very connected world where we have access to cultures and perceptions which we never had before. And, technology, one of the great things is that it's connected people, and you can find information on why do they think like that. And so the data really helps, but the data is also exploited. And so for me, it's always like, yeah, but how? I can find no absolute truth in the world. Everything has this sort of multiplistic element, and the if cases continue forever. So if this, no, if, and so it's just always sort of very complex.
It means that we are not there yet.
Yeah, and people are really opinionated, constantly think like, this is what I think. And people are not open-minded to different ideas, because if you tell it in a certain way, it sounds evil, so I probably don't talk about it. Or it sounds bad, so I probably go along with it. And sometimes you can get something across to make it really bad, so you almost won't argue against it. And this era where we are now is now this is happening. It's used as a weapon. Like, you don't want I want more gasoline. Whoa, what are you saying? I want to drive my car and I don't want a Tesla. Oh wow. Yeah, it's just like sort of provocative, no? Because well, why are you telling me this? Yeah, I don't separate glass with no, don't like it. And sometimes I drive an extra round because I love the smell of gasoline. No, yeah, it's not nice if you, yeah. It's like the opinionated fact is that let's position ourselves, therefore getting your things, and yeah, it's more or less about more data, indeed, objective data, broad data, reflect every time.
And I think it's also, curiosity is one of our superpowers. And it's curiosity that the asking of questions, because, one of the things, it also pushes the design practice forward. So, for example, if we're talking about electric cars, well, actually, they're banned from ferries, and the Isle of Man is looking into it because it's a huge risk, because they actually don't have fire trucks for the electric fires caused by electric vehicle accidents. And because of how the island's ecology, it can cause a major fire that will spread across the island with the winds really quickly. So we haven't quite got there yet with electric cars. But if we pretend electric cars and Teslas are perfect, we're never going to move forward and perfect the design more. So sometimes when we do point out faults and we say design isn't perfect, it helps us improve on it. But I think that there's a curiosity that's needed when someone doesn't believe you. And in today's society, it's like, well, you must be evil, you don't believe what I believe. Instead of a curiosity and going, well, like, well, what is your culture? Where do you come from? Where does your belief sit? Like, I have Maasai friends as women who believe in the patriarchal society that they live in. It's their culture. So you come in and you say, well, we believe in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and what you do is wrong, right? So it's a curiosity and understanding the nuance, understanding a background, understanding a situation. And then we can start to talk about how to design better.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think one thing that is apparent is that you always need to have a sort of framework by which you realize that you could be wrong at any given moment. And we talk a lot about mental health and things like don't be too harsh on yourself. But sometimes having that objective lens and questioning yourself is just a consciousness, like, yeah, okay, I'm wrong. I acknowledge it. How can we fix it? Or, the information, if you look at research here in the Netherlands, 8% of people reviewed, they said that they had fabricated research, made up data. And that's just the 8% who acknowledged the truth. The rest will never, they're shaggies. It wasn't me. And they will be shaggies forever. And a lot of our information comes from sources which, and it's defined by the victors. History is written by the victors. So Daniella, I don't know if you were of the same age, but our history books in South Africa changed. We had a history, and then this is the history. Now, this is the same with a lot of our information as well. It changes. This is a green company. Look at this disaster. It's not green. So I think it's an infinitely complex situation that we have. And as designers, yeah, life demands more and more of us, and we need to be able to, think in ways that are not naturally developed through our existence.
I think the hardest part for humans is the tendency to have confirmation bias. So you're stuck in your world, and if you there, it's hard to get you out of there. It's constantly confirmation bias or a group bias. It's you're in a company, you talk to your colleagues, and you're constantly doing the right thing for your users. So they circle around with these great ideas, and they never go outside of the office, but they keep on confirming themselves, we're doing the right thing. And these bubbles are not overlapping. It's like every confirmation bubble is out there, and people don't listen to each other. So it's very strange. It's like outcome in different countries. You need to be very smart to connect the dots and talk to a different bubble. And then it's like, oh, they're normal. It's like the Nazis talking for the first time to a Jew. It's like, well, that's a nice person. What being hating all the time. So it's kind of getting out of your comfort zone, out of your confirmation bias, because if you want to read it online, it's constantly confirming your ideology, and it will also algorithmically hyper focus you on your beliefs. You never go out.
Do you guys work with a diverse range of professionals, age-wise and background-wise?
Yes.
Do you see in the newer generations coming out of university that these very qualities that we just discussed, that we're talking about this at an educational level, and that, because I think we can all relate, when we were teenagers, we really needed peer approval.
Yeah, because I have young children, and I've been sucked into this, and let's say from the Dutch point of view, because I'm totally Dutch, meaning that in Holland you have two. You have the universities, and you have the lower levels, like the VMBO, and it's a big thing. So either you are a worker or you're a manager, and in the universities you are directed to manage. You are responsible to get workers work. And then the workers are taught to work and listen to what the manager asks of you. So, and that is now still what we see with AI and stuff is that now there's a shift. People that work know stuff. People that are graded in a university don't know shit, because they know knowledge, but the knowledge they cannot put into the right now. So they are now, if you are going to be a notaris, I don't know what, somebody's coding even, it's going to be improved by AI. As long as you use the right prompts, it's like you're not necessary anymore. We don't need university style translators, etc., etc. We need real people that understand real problems. Yeah,
Yeah.
and the workers that look into your house and says like, well, I know where the leak is and I know how to solve the leak.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have managers, you have 10 layers of managers all managing where the leak could be. There's only one that knows where to look, no?
Yeah.
I think this is going to be a shift. It's going to be a very big shift. It's not, the manager can't get away anymore with, look at me, I've got my degrees. Therefore, I'm the big doctor who knows stuff. Yeah.
That makes me happy.
Lacks the practical application, as Dennis said. He
Yeah.
also said something before, like young generations, we should push back more.
Yeah.
And our educational systems are mainly based on the Prussian system, which is out of like the 1800s. And they are made for obedience, to make workers work faster, and managers manage the workers and be managed by other managers faster.
Yeah.
But you have it in religion as well. You have it in religion. Henry Ford, who invented the 8-hour workday. So perhaps this is just a human metric. So if we're talking about human-centered design, it's a factor that we should consider as part of the human element.
Yes, but we should also challenge it. We, as Dennis and Daniella said, like, do not take assumptions and do not validate for verification, but also say, hey, I want to know if this is false or right, and how false is it, and where did it go false, and where did it go right, and why, and always why, and be curious about that.
Mm-hmm.
If I can jump in, I think, and I'm saying this now with my lecturer hat on, because actually I lecture students in master students in Vienna, and you know, one of the things with the younger generation that I see, where I think UX design or social media, where technology has played a part, is that there's definitely a decrease in the ability to think critically. And with AI, this ability for critical thinking is actually becoming a more and more important skill. And I think this is a disconnect in the education system, where it's possibly the most important thing we need to teach students is how to question, how to think, and it's falling by the wayside, and we're really seeing, like, every year the ability to think critically kind of decrease dramatically.
The dumbing down of society due to how simple things become. Yeah.
Well,
I have a little joke.
due to echo chambers. Yeah, sorry, Dennis.
Sorry, yeah, I've got a little joke about who are always telling why. Tell me why. UX researchers, Backstreet Boys, and 4-year-olds. Like, well, that's it.
Just tell me why.
Yeah, but it's also, I guess, a questioning mind. You know, when you're questioning, you're not being, and the best way to gain knowledge is through being. So if you come into a situation, you observe it for what it is. You're not thinking, but you're just watching. You spend that energy synthesizing. While as if you're thinking, you miss things because you're in your head. And overthinking is you know, everything that seems to have a solution is also a problem. And you know, if we are to really be serious about designing change, designing for better, how do we rethink the issues? You know, is it okay to dumb down people so that they have it easier, they can achieve their tasks a lot easier with a lot less effort? but in doing so, they're losing certain capabilities because they're not exercising that anymore. So like calculating, for example. They don't do the sums in their head anymore. They're using a calculator. They don't do research by going out into the world anymore. They just put it into AI. So essentially, you're giving over those of your own capabilities to, solutions that are designed and innovated. And by doing so, you lose you've got to practice, you've got to exercise your brain to keep it healthy, to keep it. If you don't use it, you lose it. That sort of mechanic, which I think is very much evident in what I've seen. Language as well. I learned a bit of Hindi when I was 15, and I've lost most of it. And at 15, I stopped speaking Afrikaans as well. And I actually unlearned a lot of Afrikaans. And it's sometimes very challenging to speak it because I just don't use it, So I think there's that's the sort of element that I'm trying to pick at here. Like, how do we make life better without spoiling life,
Do you want to make things better then?
Well, I don't know. I mean, because the title of this panel is Design for Good. So if you're designing for good, what is good? Is it better? Is it, if you solve one problem and you create 20, is that designing for good?
Designing
it's also
for good. Sorry.
Yeah, it's also like an ethical dilemma, an ethical question. What is good? And how do you design for good? How do you develop to that space where you can validate it? How did your journey start? How did you get into this space of, okay, well, I can't just believe everything I read, and here is, the reasons for that. Like remaining objective and not assuming, like considering the systems and not over designing all of the sort of, insights that you shared today. It's done through experiences that you've had in your careers.
Pain.
And
going through pain helped me, for example, a lot. As Dennis said before, we went to university, most likely all of us. And my father, he was growing up very poor in post-war Austria, like direct post-war. And he was one of the poor families because he was a foreigner. And he taught me the value of working practically. And so I was one of the rare people who were also worked during summer practically because I wanted to obtain certain things. And he constantly told me like stories about where he walked, where I am being chauffeured with the car, and so on and so forth. So most of us know the stories of our World War II surviving parents or parents post-war. And we are going to be the same with our kids. So basically, just surviving certain scenarios in be it machining, mechanical engineering, process automation, or designing for user experience, and thinking, oh my God, I've reached my limit, and then pushing through and going like, yeah, but that pain was good to go through and see where I don't want to go again, and then end up the person I'm now, more relaxed and more being like, yeah, trusting that it will take a good path. I will keep learning, and I might lose some things, but I will also gain other things. I've also lost my home dialect from Carinthia. I've lost the Croatian from my father's side, but I've also gained other languages on the path. So yeah, you lose some, you gain some.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and maybe stacking. It's like Stefan said, we all university. No, I started at a low level because, well, the school system was not equipped to my laggard mind. So I slowly went to a master degree, but it went stacking. So you have overlap. And in any layer of society, it doesn't matter where you are. There are always people that are sharp. If you're a plumber, sometimes you look in the eyes and you are sharp, you know what you're talking about. Then you have somebody from the university and like you're sharp, you know, you're overlapping the bubbles, let's say, no? And sometimes people from the university are so dumb. I think like, how could you, how did you get your diplomas? It's like, and sometimes the people low and so asked like low are so smart that you think like, well, yeah, but I'm a fisherman and I know stuff. It's like it's overlapping. So don't assume that somebody from university is smart, but take it per person. Everybody is smart in their own ways. No?
Mm-hmm.
I want to add to that. For me, it's always been, I've spent my life kind of always stepping out of the comfort zone. So, you know, when you're in your confirmation bias and no one ever questions you, you're never learning, you're never growing. And a lot of people avoid that uncomfortable space of being in a new culture, in a new country, in a new place, where you can do all the research you want and you end up on the ground and you realize actually everything you know is wrong and you have to relearn. And it's that constant relearning and that constant, I don't want to say it's humility, but it's being prepared to be wrong, and that being actually a good thing, because then you're learning and you're growing. And as soon as you put yourself in situations where you're outside of your comfort zone, outside of the people who are like you, who think like you, that's when you start to learn and you start to grow so much more. And that's when you learn how to question and you learn to look at things differently through different lenses. And I think that can only make you a much better designer. So yeah, for me, it's been working in different countries, different cultures, places I had to run workshops without speaking the language, you know, like all of these things, like you learn on your feet. And that's sometimes, you know, you learn that bus, no matter how well you made it, like it's going to hit a rock and then the tree, and then it's going to burst, you know, a tire, and then the other 4 tires. And how do you still get it to move forwards around all of these blockages? And that kind of learning as you go and growing as you go, I think that's kind of what gives you the tools to be a better designer.
This discussion made me think of a TED talk I recently listened to, which I really recommend. Birds Aren't Real, How a Conspiracy Theory Takes Flight. All right. So I think that is also a very relevant question. I don't know how you guys are for time. Do you want to address this one last question, or shall we start finalizing this panel?
No, I'm good. I can
Right.
office this in 2 hours.
Yeah. So there's a fine line between strategy and conspiracy. Can you guys dive into that a little bit? Have any of you seen this TED talk, by the way? No.
No.
Yeah, so you can start diving. I'm gonna pull up the action points, and then maybe we can answer Grace, unless Grace, you have specific question that you'd like to answer in regards to your comment. But yeah, weighing up conspiracy and strategy. What are your thoughts?
Well, the word conspiracy is already a confirmation thing. So if you constantly shout out, The conspiracy, you take that layer or that filter, and then you look at the knowledge or the information through that lens. So I don't like conspiracies. I like information. And then you triangle it, and then you make decision afterwards. But it's not, conspiracies, maybe it's the way they're written, maybe, but most of the time, take out conspiracies and just take in information and see how well it's,
holding together.
how well it's holding, how good is the data, and can you triangle it? But it's hard because now everything is like, look, there are UFOs, there are aliens, there are, you can name it, and immediately you are drawn into a story that you look at and say, oh, it's probably not right, but it's also getting you away from a general, there's so much information that's much more important to look at than certain conspiracy information.
One thing that I noticed though is, because this comes out of public relations, and public relations was formed out of propaganda. So Eddie Bernays, he was tasked by the American government to rebrand propaganda, and from that we got public relations. And
Interesting.
if you look at dark design, so of course, America really blew up the term propaganda during the last war because they said, oh, Russia is doing it. So the American public became aware of what propaganda was. And so they had to rebrand it as PR and create new strategies for the same public opinion shaping. And some people could call that a little bit of conspiracy theory, and some have. But then you look at dark design. So creating the stories of the aliens and, all of this weird stuff, it changes the public's perception of a conspiracy theory to think of, weird stuff. But in many cases, conspiracy theories can be as simple as a company using your data to modify your behavior with dark patterns. Like, oh, they notice that you have an alcohol addiction, so they keep showing you alcohol ads, you keep buying, they go to their affiliates and say, we've sold this. That's a strategy in many cases, but it's built on dark design. And you could sort of say that's a conspiracy theory, essentially.
Yeah,
that is true. Sorry, Dennis, you go.
Yeah, well, the thing is, that been preoccupied my mind for decades now. Is that we had the Darwin evolution of people. Men have beards, women have no hair, and we evolved from somewhere from maybe fish to what we are now. But there's also a mind evolution going on, that certain people know how to interpret data in such a way they're not constantly going everywhere. And certain people are very addictive to this information they come and they immediately believe it or something. So it's been long times like my grandma, when she looked at a modern film, it was too fast for her because old films were really steady with camera. And so the information from films from the 30s are totally different from films from now. So what I see is an evolution of people that obtain information and know how to deal with that information and put it into a right place and maybe profit from it or profit mentally from it. And you have people that constantly, oh, this is true, this is true, this is hard. They have an overload of information. They cannot obtain that much information. And we are in an era where there's so much overload of not only productivity, information. We have LLMs that create like language models, AI, that create lots and lots and lots of content. And when I look at this content and look at colleagues and stuff, they didn't think about like, okay, why did I put that AI and make an article of 10 pages? make it small. People obtain the information much better if it's a small text. But now you see all kinds of stuff going in online. Is like, oh, well, I have a deep understanding of this or that. They put it in AI, and then there's a whole article of 10 pages. Nobody reads it. So now we got an overload of productivity. If you want to have a report for your manager, you put it in and he will get a report, but he needs another AI to get the information out of this 10-page or 40-page document again. So it's kind of the evolution of people that know how to deal with all this new technology, all this new input, and how to place it inside of a productivity model, let's say. That's my couple of my 50 cents.
Daniella,
And you also had something to say? Stefan, you also had something to say?
yeah, but I think Daniella too. So I'll
Yes.
give her the first.
I saw you and Dennis go together, and I didn't even see Daniela. So yeah, of course.
Well, now I've forgotten what I was going to say, because I was so taken by that. It's just, I mean, it's so interesting and sad to see like how LinkedIn's already transformed, where you can like AI all of your networking interactions, but what you're getting is just vanilla all over and over again. You're not getting creativity, you're not getting critical thinking, you're not getting like a deep information is really valuable when someone can take it and package it in a way where it like is profound or makes sense. And there's a misconception that AI is doing that for you, and it's taking all of the hard work out. But yeah, it's going to synthesize for the same person the exact same way. So it's doing it in a way where you're missing the profound insights. So if you're trying to show how good you are to your client, you're just showing them that you're vanilla.
Which is basically the kind of groupthink that conspiration means, like conspirare ratio means like the ratio of the group, groupthink. And I agree with all, or there's no all in science. There's just with most of you guys, well, what you guys said. And I just...
so that's okay. No, I think we have a different definition.
Okay.
Yeah, so conspiring, and in the sense that I know what conspiring means, is like you and me want to go beat up Daniela. So we say, well, Stefan, she's coming home tonight, that dark alley. You can block her off there, and then I'm gonna come on this side, and I'm going to block her off here, and then as you come in that way, and so that's also in chess, for example, but you get it in sort of reality enactment games as well, where sometimes you got to team up and you got to beat the other guy. And that's sort of the conspiracy element, where it's like people leveraging tools and knowing more than you against you to beat you in some way.
Also, I've just remembered my school times when I had Latin in the Lyceum, and then I had to go through all of the different meanings of or potentials of certain words. So yeah, there's tons of interpretations of how Latin or Greek should be connoted, as you said down earlier, Candice. We were dumbing down things in language, in mathematics, trying to simplifying, and staying alert to that, and trying to burst out of our bubble and not get into a silo, a knowledge silo, and just doing it for myself, and not using mathematics, or not doing this, and not just trusting in technology to solve something for me, but challenging ourselves, and challenging by team working will solve a problem, because research has gotten so complex I am more and more drifting towards research, and I used to be a mediocre, okay-ish, consider myself designer, but now I'm more of a researcher, and all of my friends are saying, yeah, you're good at research. And I'm like, yeah, I got a lot to learn still, but I'm getting a little bit older and a little bit better in interpreting, but I'm not good anymore at designing products. Basically, I'm just like good at asking questions like, have you thought about this? What about that? What about that? So there's I've drifted from it, but sorry, it's already late. Forgive me.
Yeah, I think we have 3 minutes to go. Then it's 10 o'clock here in Europe. This panel is all European, so we have some panels that's between Australia and the States and Europe. So thank you very much for staying up this late with us and joining us and really taking on these challenging questions, taking it on with a straight face, being humorous about it. I really appreciate that. And I think, you know, we've really addressed some core questions which not many people will ask. So that's already something to go away with and just sort of filter through, and maybe you learn something and maybe it's applicable, but nevertheless, it was highly enjoyable.
I want a closing thing because of your story. Secondary consequences. It's like your first intent has secondary consequences. Therefore, sometimes the right, wrong, whatever intent has circumstances that flow. That was my
One question. So obviously you have a lot of terms that you use, and you've learned these terms somewhere. Are there sources where participants and viewers can go to sort of become aware with the concepts that you're working with? And sort of what are the main concepts? Can I have 2 or 3 from each of you?
Yeah, sure.
Daniella, you're first on my screen, followed by Stefan, and then Dennis.
Okay, so I mean, my main terms is I use the term impact design and designing for impact a lot, and I need to put it out there, but I was challenged to consolidate everything I've learned and am learning into something that I can teach and share with others. So I'm building an impact ikigai, which is kind of translating it into a toolkit, like a framework to open up ways of questioning. So that's kind of one thing. And the other thing is, problem thinking. So when we go straight into design thinking, we often miss questioning the problem. So it's this realm of how do you dig into a problem? And I have looked for useful resources on that, just because it's something I've become personally quite obsessed with. And yeah, if anyone's interested, I am happy to kind of distill a couple of my resources on this whole thing of problem questioning and the why and the need for that into something. But yeah, for me, it's impact design, problem questioning, and yeah, it's moving from a theory of change to designing for impact is always about questioning your assumptions.
Mm-hmm. Is there somewhere where we can access it? A website, a book, a publication, somewhere?
Okay, so I am a bit behind on all of that. It will be coming. I have my website is reimpact.studio. And yes, you can follow me on LinkedIn and reach out to me and push me, because I need to publish it. I've done it. I just haven't put it out there. So I will post it all.
Super. And you, Stefan?
So my main mantra is kill your darlings, and that has been drilled into me a lot of times. So basically, I always want to challenge myself. I always want to know is it good enough? And be ready to fail, and then question, why did it fail? Where did it fail? For whom was it? What was the cause? What was the effect? And then why the boy band song again? And
Sort
the
of like
second, yes, please.
an abused child also. Why did this happen to me? Why is life so bad? I'm
Oh,
sorry.
no, not like that. Not like that.
No,
It's like,
well, that's from my side. They were. It's not important to continue.
it's more like a how might we? So the why serves the how might we do better, how might we serve social behaviors that lead to healthier lives, and not only for us but for our environment too, because we want to shift from an exploitative standpoint, or I at least want to be a change manager or maker or enabler for others to pick up behaviors that benefits their health. It's like, we don't only need lifespan, we need health span. It's like what Dr. Peter Attia, for example, is preaching on longevity, is like, how good is a long life if you have a very unhealthy life? And resources for that you'll find in Hartmut Esslinger's books. He was very informing for me. He was Kill Your Darlings was like his shtick, his go-to, and his experiment with me when he killed my darlings in university. And he came and he was like, what's your favorite idea? And I was like, this. And he's like, yeah, we're not doing that. So yeah, go read his books. And I think it's Design Forward. That was the latest I would recommend here. There he is on strategic design and what his point of view is regarding his times at Apple and Samsung and Sony.
Awesome. And Dennis?
Yeah. Well, again, in this developer-driven world where everything is overproductive, we need the problem point of view. We need a minimal usable product, not an MVP. And we need to have a point of view of the end user, but also we need to go undercover probably, because if we are going inside as a designer, they will probably ask for a design, and we UX specialists are broader than that. So
yeah. All right. So, okay, perfect. All right. So I think, we've had a very fruitful session. It was very interesting, very challenging. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for those watching. Thank you for those who joined here. And tomorrow there are some more events. And we have until next week. Then it's over for at least a year. And then we'll be back, and I hope that you guys will join us again next year, and maybe we can see what came out of the initiative this year and how we can elevate it next year. Thank you, Daniella, for the message.
Thank you, everyone.